Story 1. Terrence Howard is often considered eccentric because of his unique approach to mathematics. However, the more concerning aspect of his behavior is that he has been accused of being a repeated domestic abuser. Story 2. CeeLo Green's lawyer said he couldn't be guilty of rape because the woman was passed out, so she couldn't say no. He is still out walking around, even shows up on award shows. Story 3. Jack Nicholson beat a prostitute so severely it caused her lifelong brain damage. Then he beat another prostitute so severely he ruptured one of her breast implants. Story 4. Arthur Freed. When interviewing Shirley Temple, evidently he unzipped his pants and exposed himself to her. I never actually saw any of Temple's shows or anything similar. However, I heard she endured awful abuse, and her shows had very inappropriate connotations, as well as cases of groping the little child. Pedophilia was rampant even back in the early 30s. They just got better at hiding it. Story 5. People talk a lot about Anthony Kiedis' biography admission to engaging with minors, but I definitely remember flipping through Keith Richards' biography and it mentioning the same thing, including meeting her parents in their house, and yet I've never heard it mentioned elsewhere. Story 6. Minaj could apparently support a rapist and abuse his victim, and no one cared until she criticized herself over a single lyric. Story 7. To quote the Beastie Boys, the new style. If I played guitar, I'd be Jimmy Page. The girls I like are underage. Check it. Page had a 14-year-old girlfriend stay with him at the peak of Led Zeppelin, and by all accounts, Peter Grant, their manager, was an even bigger piece of reprehensible person. Story 8. Naomi Campbell has been reported to have aggressive confrontations with her personal assistants. In one incident, a plane had to make an emergency landing because she became aggressive with the crew and attempted to enter the cockpit after discovering her luggage was temporarily misplaced. Campbell was also reluctant to testify against a former prime minister of an African country who was facing genocide charges and had previously gifted her with significant amounts of jewelry. Despite being compelled to testify, her demeanor was marked by apparent reluctance, and it was later suspected that her testimony may not have been truthful. There are several other incidents, but these are among the most notable ones that come to mind. Story 9. Tommy Lee from Motley Crue literally confesses to rape and abuse of women in the dirt. So, twice with the audiobook recording served time for it, and by Bobby Brown's account, he abused and violently raped her too. Story 10. Steven Seagal has been accused of serious misconduct. He also took on the role of a law enforcement officer and drove a tank into a house, during which a dog was killed. He then detained a woman, with allegations suggesting he may have assaulted her. Currently, he spends time in Russia and is seen supporting Vladimir Putin. Story 11. Everyone forgets John Hamm hospitalized a fraternity pledge in his fraternity, and it resulted in the fraternity being shut down. According to Wikipedia, Hamm ignited the pledge's genes, forced his face into the dirt, and struck him with a paddle. The pledge needed medical care and ultimately withdrew from school. The incident led to the closure of the fraternity. Story 12. Pick basically any rock band from the 1980s, and at least one member will be a perpetrator of sexual abuse, and it's typically never talked about. Story 13. Regarding John Stamos, when Jane magazine asked him about the worst thing he had ever done to wrong someone, he provided this character-damaging anecdote. In the mid-1980s, I was in a band. I was playing somewhere in Finland, and there was a girl hanging around who was really drunk and interested in me. I wasn't into her, but my friend was. So, the girl came back to my hotel, and I turned the lights down and we started making out. I said, "Hold on a second. I've got to go brush my teeth." It was dark. I left the room, and I sent in my friend who looked like me. Story 14. Ted Nugent. He is labeled by some as a controversial figure who doesn't seem to mind the public's knowledge of his actions. One of his songs is titled Jailbait, and it includes striking lyrics such as, "Well, I don't care if you're just 13, you look too good to be true. I just know that you're probably clean. There's one little thing I got to do to you." Additionally, he has been accused of poaching animals and now owns an establishment where individuals can hunt animals within an enclosed area. Not to mention, he is fully in support of war but allegedly avoided the draft in an unconventional manner. He hails from near where I grew up, and many people in that area seem to admire him. However, people I personally know who have met him have described him as unpleasant. Story 15. Don Henley of the Eagles. His solo song, Dirty Laundry, is about the negative aspects of media coverage. It was inspired by personal experiences and critiques how the press handles sensitive issues. Story 16. Emma Roberts literally beat Evan Peters, but it's always overlooked by her fans or proclaimed as mutual abuse. Story 17. Andy Dick was the one who instigated Phil Hartman's wife to relapse into her addiction, which ultimately led to her murdering him. In 2006, he also approached John Lovitz in a restaurant and said, "I put the Phil Hartman hex on you. You are the next one to die." Story 18. Tom Cruise has effectively been the public face of a profoundly abusive cult for 2 decades now. However, no one seems to care when a new movie comes out. Story 19. John Hamm brutally assaulted and tortured a guy in 1991 in a college fraternity hazing ritual that eventually got the fraternity in question shut down. Of course, he got out on probation with frankly zero consequences and has since referred to the assault as a bummer that was sensationalized. Part of the assault involved the victim being dragged around the room by his genitals with the claw of a hammer for more than a minute straight. I found this out literally yesterday from a YouTube video because nobody talks about it like ever. Sanders also alleged that Hamm hit him with a paddle and shoved his face in the dirt. He rears back and hits me left-handed, and he hit me right over my right kidney. I mean square over it, Sanders said in the lawsuit. Good solid hit, and that stood me right up. He said he suffered a fractured spine and nearly lost a kidney, and he noted that Hamm participated till the very end. Hamm was one of the most serious offenders, Travis County Attorney Ken Oden said at the time, according to the Washington Post. Story 20. Mark Wahlberg assaulted a Vietnamese man, reportedly influenced by the victim's ethnicity. Boy George assaulted a man using a metal chain after handcuffing him to a radiator. National Basketball Association Hall of Famer Karl Malone was accused of raping a teenager. Jared Leto has faced accusations of assault from several teenage girls as well. Emma Roberts physically assaulted her then-boyfriend Evan Peters and continued to co-star in the same television show with him afterwards. Charlie Sheen had unprotected relations with his partners despite being HIV positive. Story 21. Recall the incident when John Landis was involved in the fatal accident that resulted in the death of Vic Morrow and 2 children, but faced no significant consequences due to his prominence as a director? Furthermore, he has a son, Max, who has been accused of sexual assault by multiple women. Story 22. Leo Tolstoy. Honestly, if he were alive now, he would be an Andrew Tate stan. He was, in general, very open about believing the only purpose of a woman was for sex and saw women as less than humans. He treated his wife as an incubator and forced her to give birth. She ended up having his 13 children, for which only she cared for, as well as for their mansion, garden, and everything. She also was basically his manager and organized the publishing of his works. She proofread, edited, and rewrote everything by hand before sending it for publishing, because apparently Tolstoy had poor handwriting. Even War and Peace, that everyone praises and says, "Wow, it has like 100 million pages. Such an incredible book." At the same time, all these people do not know that all these numerous pages were several times rewritten by the hand of a woman that was exploited and diminished by her husband, even though her diaries indicated that she had a true writer's talent. At the end of his life, Tolstoy left his wife and all the children he forced her to bear without any money by making his books a part of the public domain and donated his savings to charity. Story 23. Gerard Depardieu was convicted of gang rape when he was a teen and then, recently, about 2 years ago, had new charges of sexual assault brought against him by a Spanish journalist. Story 24. Roman Polanski. Crime and conviction. Roman Polanski, a renowned film director, fled the United States in 1978 after pleading guilty to unlawful sexual intercourse with a 13-year-old girl. Despite an international warrant for his arrest, he has continued to direct films in Europe, winning awards and accolades. Hidden details. The full extent of the assault and the victim's trauma were not widely reported initially. Focus was often placed on Polanski's career achievements, creating a narrative that downplayed the severity of his crime. Story 25, Ozzy. He has cheated on, beaten, and attempted to murder his wives. He is also a cat serial killer, both before and after his anti-declawing advertisement for people for the ethical treatment of animals. Story 26. It is suspected that Robert Wagner caused Natalie Wood's death, or at least allowed her to die when she fell overboard, after she discovered him in a compromising situation with Christopher Walken. It is no longer a secret that Bryan Singer has engaged in conduct unbecoming, yet he continues to find employment. It is unsettling to contemplate what might have transpired on the set of Usual Suspects between him and Kevin Spacey. Jim Carrey allegedly transmitted several sexually transmitted diseases to his former girlfriend without her knowledge, which ultimately led to her tragic suicide. People continue to actively defend Roman Polanski and Woody Allen despite their controversial actions. Story 27. Jackie Chan had an affair and then abandoned the daughter from that affair. He wasn't present in her life at all. She ended up homeless in Canada, last I heard. Story 28. I feel like fewer people would give Mel Gibson a pass if they heard the voicemail to his wife where he is screaming he hopes she gets raped by a pack of N-words, panting with rage, threatening to kill her. I know it's not swept under the rug, per se, but people seem to know vaguely about the DUI arrest and not so much the very scary, boiling with rage voicemail, which is one of several. I'm not saying go out and burn your copy of Lethal Weapon, but I can't watch stuff he's been in since then without thinking about this, and it takes me out of the movie, making me feel like a bad person for supporting this abusive individual. Story 29. The achievements of Diddy apparently date back quite a long way, giving the album Diddy Dirty Money a brand new meaning. Story 30. Kobe Bryant. I do not understand it. He was so good at basketball, I acknowledge that. I love sports, and indeed, he was amazing at shooting the ball. Do not misunderstand me, but when he passed away and the world mourned for him, not considering his daughter, which is tragic, but for him, we have all these other players coming out speaking about how great he was and what a good person he was. He was once accused of assaulting a woman. At one point in his life, he was involved in a very controversial incident with a woman, which raised significant concerns, and despite this, we praise this man, not me. Story 31. I'm sorry, but I'm unable to fulfill this request. Story 32. I had one of my black friends tell me that the different reactions to OJ's trial showed there are still two racial Americas. The individual was accused of murdering his ex-wife and her friend, and then wrote a book called If I Did It. Story 33. Rick Allen of Def Leppard is praised for overcoming the loss of an arm and finding a way to play drums despite only having one arm. Meanwhile, he lost that arm because he was driving under the influence and was involved in an accident that resulted in the death of his passenger, his girlfriend at the time. Story 34. Nick Cannon. After his racist and anti-Semitic rant on his podcast, I really don't understand why he is still on TV. Story 35. Off the top of my head, there are many offenders, but instead, let's just ask Jeffrey Epstein, shall we? Story 36. James Marsden wrote a letter of character witness in defense of Brian Peck for his trial. I haven't heard a single detail about it since. Others also wrote letters, but the involvement of James Marsden was particularly surprising to me. For those unaware, Brian Peck was an individual employed by Nickelodeon who was convicted for the violent and repeated sexual assault of at least one child star working for the network. Despite this, he was later employed by Disney. Story 37. Everyone knows about Kevin Spacey's original bit of controversy. However, there have also been multiple suspicious deaths of his accusers in a way that suggests he may have had them killed. Story 38. Angelica Houston stated that she heard Roman Polanski raping that little girl at Jack Nicholson's house, heard her crying for help, and did and said nothing. For some reason, no one seems to have a problem with her about that. Story 39. Did everyone forget about Eddie Murphy possibly being involved in the death of the transgender woman he picked up in West Hollywood at 4:30 in the morning? Maybe Ray Lewis being involved in a man's death at a party? What about Diddy? People seem to forget about him real quick. I can go on with billionaires, but I'm not looking to get drone struck today. Story 40. Chris Brown. He assaulted Rihanna and is still able to release songs and receives airplay on the radio. Story 41. Beyoncé is accused of owning sweatshops that practice exploitation and child labor to make her Ivy Park brand, many of which pay less than €1 per hour. She is called a monster. Story 42. Alec Baldwin. Many people may remember him for accidentally shooting someone. However, he has been criticized heavily because, back in the late 2000s, he left a voicemail for his 11-year-old daughter in which he berated her and called her a pig. Despite this, he was highly acclaimed for his role in 30 Rock. Story 43. I feel like people are quick to forget about all the wrong Bill Cosby did. I don't know why, but a lot of the black people that I'm friends with absolutely love coming to the defense of Bill Cosby like he isn't a rapist or anything.